Okay, I could just ask you to please take your seats as we kick off our afternoon. Thank you to everyone, our speakers, our audience, everyone who's making this possible. It's been a fantastic day so far. We want to jump right in and get to the future of American energy. It's a great honor to welcome our next speaker. She's the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and she's the former governor of South Carolina. Could I get a huge round of applause for Nikki Haley? Hi, Nikki. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for having me at your party. I appreciate it. Thank you, Maynard, for your kind words. I appreciate you and Harold for your commitment to our country. We need more leaders like you who understand that a safe, secure, and prosperous future is built on a foundation of American energy. Some things in life you never forget, like what I experienced 3 months ago in Midland, Texas. I was there to roll out my energy plan, but what I said paled in comparison to what I saw. I went to an oil rig in the Permian Basin. The operator showed me around. He was obviously very proud. So were the workers that I met. They're doing a job, but in their hearts, they know it's so much more. As I talked with them, I gained an even deeper appreciation for the men and women who work in American energy. They're patriots. Every American should see what I saw. There isn't a person in our country who doesn't owe them a debt of gratitude. That rig isn't just bringing up oil from underground. It's lifting up an entire country. It's fueling a more prosperous life for working families and a more peaceful world. Every drop of American energy we produce is a godsend to families. It makes everything more affordable. The bills we pay, the gas we pump, the everyday goods and groceries that we buy. Energy puts money in families' pockets, and no one benefits more than the least fortunate. But the benefits of American energy don't end there, not even close. Every ounce of energy we get right here at home, we don't have to buy from someone else, especially our enemies. We should stop sending them our taxpayer money, and we should never rely on foreign enemies. Lord knows we have more than enough energy right under our feet. All these thoughts went through my head as I toured that rig, and as I stood there, I made a promise to myself and every American. We're going to open our country's energy floodgates. There is no such thing as too much American energy. This shouldn't be a controversial statement. But unlike energy, common sense is in short supply these days. In fact, in Joe Biden, we have a president who seems to genuinely hate American energy. We saw that fact on full display this month. Joe Biden made almost half the National Petroleum Reserve off limits to oil exploration. Americans are going to pay higher prices for this foolishness. And with less energy, we're going to get more dependent on foreign countries. But that's the consistent theme of the past 2 years. More suffering at home and less security abroad. It's the inevitable result of virtually every energy decision Joe Biden has made. He's crushing producers under an avalanche of mandates. He's blocked safe new drilling off of our coasts. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. And when the president talks, he demonizes companies like yours while insulting and ignoring the workers I met on that Midland rig. Joe Biden's endgame could hardly be more clear. Kill American jobs, crush American companies, and keep American energy in the ground forever. This isn't just un-American, it's anti-American. and it has to stop. I can hardly think of a more self-defeating strategy than Joe Biden's. Americans are paying more, but they're getting less. Under this administration, energy prices have risen twice as fast as everything else. A gallon of gas costs 2/3 more. No wonder before he took his oath of office, he pledged to put oil companies out of business. We can no longer wait to see if Joe Biden is a man of his word. Americans are poorer now because of him. And states like Texas and California are on the brink of blackouts, with more states heading that way. But you know who's really winning? You guessed it, our enemies. The same Joe Biden who's keeping American energy in the ground is letting Iran ship over 1 million barrels of oil a day to China. And the same Joe Biden who's blocking drilling in the States gave a green light to drilling in Venezuela. Let me be clear. We should never buy dirty oil from Iran or Venezuela. Worst of all, Joe Biden is playing right into the hands of communist China. He's forcing America to go green, yet that means sending greenbacks to China. We're buying billions of dollars of Chinese solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicle batteries, and so much more. It's irresponsible. China is profiting off of Americans while being the worst world's polluter by far. Because of our president, China is stronger and richer, and America is weaker and poorer. It's like Jimmy Carter all over again. And just like Jimmy Carter, we need to make Joe Biden a one-term president. I'm running for president to end this madness. We need to protect Americans in our dangerous world, and we need to empower our people with better jobs and bigger paychecks. We don't have to choose between security and prosperity. This has never been an either-or. It's always been both. The key to stronger families in a safer country is American energy. I have a plan to unleash our boundless resources. Yet before I dive in, I want to make one thing very clear. My goal isn't just energy independence, though we should always have that. My goal is to make energy dominant. We shouldn't play by anyone's rules, not China, not Russia, not Iran, no one. We should make the world play by our rules so that Americans win every single time. As president, I will never demonize our energy companies or demean the patriots who work for them. I will never weaponize the federal government to crush job creators or kill good-paying jobs. It's time for Washington to stop working against American energy and start working for our national interest. We'll make it easier to produce far more energy than we do right now. We will never stand in the way of clean, safe, and responsible exploration and development. We'll fast-track permits for new projects and green-light pipelines and storage facilities from coast to coast. It shouldn't take years, much less a decade, to get a permit. It should take weeks, if not days. If we could build the Pentagon in 16 months, we can approve the Keystone Pipeline in 16 minutes. We'll stop radical special interest groups from abusing our legal system to stop production in its tracks. And we won't let frivolous excuses keep American energy in the ground any longer. Case in point, right now in Texas, Joe Biden is trying to stifle energy production to protect the sagebrush lizard. That's insane for two reasons. First, our president cares more about a lizard than good-paying jobs and greater national security. Second, Americans are smart enough to produce energy and protect nature at the same time. Joe Biden shouldn't trust the American Joe Biden should trust the American people, not insult our intelligence and destroy our economy. Under my plan, we'll stop Joe Biden's disastrous campaign to fight climate change with corporate welfare. He's made America far more dependent on communist China. Yet the pandemic proved that we should never rely on an enemy for critical supplies. We have all the resources we need to make the most advanced technology we want, and we don't have to impoverish ourselves to protect the environment. The best way to make our country cleaner, healthier, and happier is to use more American energy, not less. China isn't the only country I'll hold accountable. I'll stand up to every enemy that uses energy against us. Russia, Iran, and Venezuela are using their oil to advance their evil, and Joe Biden is letting them get away with it. I won't. I'll introduce our enemies to their worst nightmare: American energy dominance. The Chinese Communist Party, Vladimir Putin, the Ayatollahs in Iran, the tyrant in Venezuela, they're worried about those patriotic workers I met in Midland. Now imagine how scared they'll be when we have even more people drilling and pumping. When we unleash American energy, our enemies don't stand a chance. History proves that no one is more creative or ingenious than Americans. When we have the freedom to dream and dare, we transform lives in incredible ways. The world is cleaner, richer, and safer today because Americans did what we do best. Yet we've only begun to make a difference. We have the power to do even more good for even more people in our country and across the world. This is why I stand for American energy. It's the cornerstone of our national power. Energy is the guaranteed path to opportunity and prosperity for our families. Energy is the path to security in these dangerous times. It's high time we stopped moving backwards and started moving forward toward a stronger and safer United States. I promise to partner with you to reach that future and to benefit every single American. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Haley. Joining the ambassador today is anchor for Bloomberg Media's Bloomberg Markets Americas and Bloomberg Markets European Close, Alex Steele.
This is a sincere pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here, Harold, and it's a pleasure to talk with you, Ambassador. You said floodgates. Floodgates to me seem to be that all the guys are out here are going to go and they're going to pump a lot of oil right away. Is that what you mean by floodgates?
I think that we need to understand that we don't ever want to be dependent on anyone else. If you look at the situation we have, look at how slow the permitting is.
Yes.
We need to speed up the permitting. We need to allow the pipelines, and let's start by what we can do quickly. We know that if we go to power sites and industry sites, those are the first places we can go to start permitting those pipelines quickly. Let's get the EPA out of the way. Let's stop demonizing producers. And what I want to do is partner with producers. Mm-hmm. There is a way to do this well. There's a way to use innovation. There's a way to do it in a clean, safe way. But you don't do that by pushing the ones that are helping you away. You do that by coming together and looking at the innovation we have. And we've seen a lot of innovation, but there's more that can be had when we start partnering as opposed to demonizing.
So this leads me also to part of your economic plan that you unveiled on Friday also, and part of that is repealing the $500 billion of green subsidies, right? But a lot of oil producers in this room like those subsidies because they're also partnering and doing things with carbon capture and storage. How do you do both?
Well, first of all, I've never been a fan of corporate subsidies.
Okay.
I just haven't. But I think what we do also have to understand is There's certain parts of the industry that get subsidies, and so you don't stop one part of the industry from getting subsidies if you can't stop all parts of the industry from getting subsidies.
Like
So
subsidies for all or subsidies for nobody?
well,
kind of
you know,
thing?
if you've got ethanol, we're not going to stop for ethanol while we allow for oil. We're not going to stop for oil when we allow for ethanol. So what do? We need to find a measured approach, and the measured approach is how do we become energy dominant? And the way we do that is it's not just a free-for-all with everyone, but you pull the rules back, pull the regulations back, pull the bureaucracy back, and empower the producers. Give them reasons to want to invest. Right now, why would a producer want to invest? Because they know that these regulations and rules are going to tear them down. What we need to do is not make producers any more dependent on government, but let them tell us what they need from us to be dominant. And that's when we'll start to see the solutions that we need.
So you would keep sort of some of the energy subsidies in terms of, say, carbon capture or carbon management?
We want carbon capture. That's a great thing. We want to make sure that we do that. And that's something that it's a win-win all the way around. So where we can find those win-wins, we're going to continue to do that. But we don't need to do the things like what we saw in the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, here, Joe Biden, I mean, God bless him, he wants all cars to be electric by 2030. Think about that for a second. First of all, you're looking at the fact 70% of the electric vehicle batteries are made in China. But more than that, we don't have the infrastructure for it. And I'm not just talking about charging stations. Electric vehicles are heavy. Our roads and bridges wouldn't be able to handle it if
Parking
you
lots.
suddenly made all of those electric vehicles happen by 2030. So let's look at it in a whole situation. It's not that we don't want electric vehicles, but we better make sure we've got the infrastructure to manage that before you start mandating it on everyone.
So I love that you went to China and EVs. That was in my list, but a little later. Because part of it is the EU, for example, is looking at restricting EVs from China into the EU because China's making really cheap cars and they're just dumping it in Europe. But if we don't help elevate EVs here, China can just do the same thing here.
Well, I think what we have to do is say, what are we going to do to start making sure that we're making the batteries here? What we don't want to do is give a windfall of money to China. I think that Europeans are worried about that exact same thing. So let's go and make sure that we are making American-made as much as possible. And when it's not American-made, it should be from a friend, not an enemy. We see that same thing when it comes to, you know, what's happening with Russia. You know, we're enriching so much. Russia's enriching half of the world's uranium. And when you look at that, what does that mean for us? Over $1 billion is going from us to a Russian government company. And you look at 1 out of every 20 American families and businesses is dependent on that Russian uranium. So right now we have permits that have gotten approved in Ohio and New Mexico. We need to get those up and going. That would reduce it by 75%, but we've got to keep going on that. These are the things that I'm talking about. The first thing with national security that you always do is say, what do you do to make sure that if your enemies pulled the rug out from under you tomorrow, you would be ready? American energy is a big part of that. And getting Russia, China, Iran, and Venezuela out of the mix is the first thing we should do.
You're one of the only candidates who talk really hard about the budget deficit and really reducing it. You mentioned the entitlement programs, right? How do you do, though, everything that you just outlined without spending a lot of money? Because
you are taking into account that we would just keep the budget the way it is. The first thing, you have to look at the fact that we're $33 trillion in debt. We're having to borrow money just to make our interest payments. China owns some of that debt. I have said for a long time, I would love it to be able to say, oh, Biden did that to us. Well, he sent us down this socialism creep, but our Republicans did that to us too. You look at that $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill that they passed with no accountability. They expanded welfare, giving us 90, almost 100 million Americans on Medicaid now, 42 million Americans on food stamps. And then you turn around and you look, and did Republicans try and make it right? No, they opened up earmarks and pet projects for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them last December. We have to start focusing on
cutting the spending. The way you do that is I put out my economic plan last week. We're going to focus on the middle class. We're going to reduce the taxes for the middle class, and we're going to collapse those brackets so that they have more cash in their pocket. We're going to cut the federal gas and diesel tax, because we know right now the small portion that comes from the federal government also pays for hiking trails and bike trails and everything else. We need to make sure that we start looking at an infrastructure plan that's 20, 30, 40 years out, not from the old archaic system that we've always used. And let's go to zero-based budgeting. Government needs to say, what do we have to have? And then build up, instead of what you're talking about, which is you just assume everything we paid for last year, we're going to pay again and then add more to it.
You can still have all the stuff. You just need to start from zero.
Let's prioritize what we have to have. There's a lot of old programs. There's a lot of problems that we have in that. When we do that, and then let's look at, you're seeing a government shutdown conversation that's happening right now. And it's a false narrative to say that the Freedom Caucus is holding things hostage because they want to cut, or do you allow the government to go forward? First of all, you cut and you allow the government to go forward. You can have both, not either or. Think about this. Congress has proposed a budget on time 4 times in 40 years. 4 times in 40 years. We have to go back to no budget, no pay. If Congress can't produce a budget, Congress doesn't get paid. We should not be in this scenario, but because they wait and they don't work and they don't produce results, we end up in the same situation over and over again. That'll stop when I'm president.
It's also been shown that government shutdowns hurt both parties. Have you talked to leadership at all, particularly as you guys are headed into the second presidential debate?
I haven't talked to leadership. I've talked to all of Congress saying it is irresponsible and inexcusable that you would let government shut down.
And what's the response?
It is also irresponsible and inexcusable to not cut all of the spending. They are using our budget and keeping it in pandemic spending. We're no longer in a pandemic. Why are they still spending at those levels? Taxpayers can't afford it.
So what's their response when you say, guys, get it together?
I mean, they need to get in a room and figure it out. We're going to find out, I guess.
But are you worried that this is going to harm the party?
This is going to harm taxpayers. It's not about the party. Taxpayers already can't afford groceries and gas. They can't afford buying a home or buying a car. And now you're going to say, oh, we can't figure it out. We're going to shut down government. That's not okay. You don't get to do that. Instead, you have to start cutting what you spend. Why is it everybody in this room balances a budget? I balanced a budget as governor of South Carolina. Why is Congress the only group that refuses to balance a budget? It's the reason we have to have term limits in Washington, but it's also the reason we need them to start doing their job. Taxpayers and businesses work for government right now. So government's got to start working for them.
So let's circle back to the everyday American. And Governor DeSantis talked about pledging to get gasoline prices to $2 in his first year. You talk about scrapping the gas tax and the diesel tax. Do you think we can get to $2 a gallon? Like, would you support that? How would you do that?
Well, I didn't propose that.
Right, but he did. So would you match it?
I don't I don't support what he proposes.
Okay,
I came out with my own.
So that wouldn't be something that you could commit to?
No. I mean, I think what we do is we focus on the taxpayers. How do we get more cash in the taxpayer's pocket? Let's eliminate the federal gas tax and diesel tax, and let's start coming up with an infrastructure plan that can manage what we need in the next decades going forward. That's the focus I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on strengthening the middle class. That's where we have to focus. Right now, we're watching in America where the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, and we are losing that middle class. We're going to focus on the middle class.
Well, considering that $2 gasoline means like $45 oil, everyone here is pretty happy that you are going to support that one, I bet. Okay, so you talk a lot about China as really the crux of China then becoming your economic policy, right? Like combating China, how do you manage that? If we're all going to eventually transition and get to cleaner fuel, how do we flex our muscle in China and India to get them to also reduce it? How do you do that?
So, by winning. And so I'll tell you the first thing that we need to do in terms of with China and Russia is let's take India. They have millions of people right now without electricity. They need clean, cheap electricity that they can start doing with their country. They have doubled the number of coal-producing plants that they have, which is a problem. That's why we need to be doing more in America. We need to be exporting as much liquefied natural gas as we can. India is going to be a friend of ours. India is worried about China. They just gave themselves $1 billion stimulus to become less dependent on China. Let's partner with them. So not only are we exporting liquefied natural gas to the Europeans, let's do it to India as well. That's when it's a win-win. We have it, let's share it. That's the goal, and that's how we would handle India. With China, you beat them. What I saw at the United Nations, there were two things our enemies never wanted us to have. They never wanted us to have a strong military, and they never wanted us to be energy independent. Let's be energy dominant. That's how you defeat China.
What energy dominance? Like what of the energy mix? All the stuff?
Well,
Just oil and gas?
So I think we should be all of the above energy, while also focusing on innovation that allows us to continue to be cleaner and safer in that process. The problem is when you start picking what kinds of energy, that's when you're picking winners and losers. Let's do all of it. I want us to be energy dominant. I don't ever want us to have to lean on an enemy or have to be dependent on a foreign country for our energy needs, not when we're this blessed.
And you're one of the only ones up there that talk about actual climate change. So you are a proponent of wind and solar. Like, you want them all. What would be a good energy mix for you after your first term?
Well, first of all, I do think that climate change is real. I think we have to acknowledge that it's real. But I also don't think we go so extreme that we say we have to do all these things by X year. Instead, that's where the partnership in this room comes. They know innovation better than anyone else. We know what we can do to start finding those ways of capturing carbon, of making sure that we do the fusion so that we can start getting a net energy plus in the process. These things are starting to come out. Now let's just go and make that happen. But yes, I believe in wind, I believe in solar, I believe in all of those things because I think all of those are part of how we become healthier as an environment and healthier in teaching the countries around the world what else we're doing.
At the end of your first term, how much of the energy mix is renewables? How much does it grow by?
I don't think that's for me to decide. I think that's for the industry to decide. That's where we have to come together. We have to say, what can we do that's safe, that's clean, that's affordable, that helps taxpayers? The problem is you need to have a president that understands you've got to have an energy community that's going to say, well, this is what we can do, or we can propose this, or let's pull this innovation in. Right now, you're treating them like second-class citizens. They're experts. We need to use the experts. And if I go and say, this is how we want to make sure we reduce emissions, how do we get there? This is the group that tells us how we get there, not government bureaucrats, not regulators. They're not going to tell you how to get there. They're just going to squeeze you to the point that you don't have energy to start with.
You got a lot of attention there when you said that. When you're taking a look at, say, unleashing the energy dominance, right? Labor is still a really big problem. I was talking to Doug Lawler of Continental, and he's like, labor's just still really tight. So even if you wanted to sort of innovate and pump a lot of money into stuff, you can't. We don't have the labor for it. How do you get there? How do you get skilled, quality labor to this industry?
Well, you always have to. In South Carolina, we went from a state that was making textiles that all went overseas, and we had to get used to, when I recruited in, we were then building planes and cars and tires, and we had to retrain our workforce. And the way we did that was we worked through our technical schools to start focusing on the new jobs that we had and how we could get them back on track. We need to do that. We need to make sure that we're filling the jobs that we need. And you do that by reskilling, and then you also look at the fact that while we're looking to close the border, and we need to close the border because there's more lawlessness that we've seen in a long time, you also look at legal immigration. And when you look at legal immigration, we have to stop the way that we do quotas based on numbers. We'll take X number this year, X number next year, and start saying, what do our industries need that they can't fill? So think construction, think farming, think tourism, think energy production, and then you bring it based on merit. When you bring it based on merit, that's when you build up our economy, instead of just focusing on what quota you're going to deal with from one year to the next.
We only have a minute left. I just wanted to ask you about your path. So we have the second debate coming this week. What is your path If Iowa doesn't go your way, for example, what is the Nikki Haley path now? What's the Nikki Haley path in 2028?
Well, you're assuming that Iowa won't go my way.
No, I'm really not. I'm saying you got to have lots of plans. There got to be a spreadsheet there with lots of things going on.
I have one plan. We have done
I set her up for that.
85 events in Iowa, New Hampshire. We continue to do big events in South Carolina. The momentum is real. We're pushing hard. We're raising money, and we are we're putting ourselves out there in the debates, and the support is strong. And so our goal is to have a strong showing in Iowa, have a strong showing in New Hampshire, have a strong showing in South Carolina, and finish this all the way through. We have to make sure that we don't end up with a President Kamala Harris. And right now we are going down the path of getting a President Kamala Harris, and that should worry every single American. So if we're gonna do that, the only way we win is with a new generational leader. I have had executive experience as a 2-term governor. I've got foreign policy experience from having been at the United Nations, negotiating with 193 countries. I know what we need to do to make America strong and proud again. I'm not gonna stop until we get there.
Can a moderate, reasonable Republican win the primaries?
I think you are gonna see a pro-American, tough-talking accountant suddenly go in there and say, you know what, let's get our debt on track, let's control law and order, let's get these borders closed, let's make sure that we get transparency back in the classroom, and let's put China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela finally in their place so that America can be strong. Yes, I can do that.
Ambassador, thank you. Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.